1962. A gleaming watch ship slides out of Savannah, Georgia, drawing crowds to the waterfront like a moon launch. No smoke from the stack, no fuel smell, no tanker trucks lined up at the dock. Just silence, and a vessel moving under power that came from a core of uranium the size of a kitchen refrigerator. That ship could circle the Earth 14 times on a single load of fuel. It worked exactly as designed. It never had a serious accident. It ran for years. And then it was quietly retired, and the entire idea of nuclear cargo shipping died with almost no public argument. That is the part worth understanding. Because this wasn't a story of a technology that blew up. It was a story of a technology that worked perfectly and still lost. And the reasons why I tell you something uncomfortable about how the world actually decides which machines get to exist. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what the world looked like in 1955 when the Atoms for Peace program was first taking shape. The United States had spent a decade watching nuclear energy exist only as a weapon. 2 cities leveled, an arms race accelerating, a public that associated the word nuclear with nothing except destruction. President Eisenhower wanted to change that narrative entirely. The idea was to take the same controlled fission technology powering United States Navy submarines and demonstrate it doing something peaceful, something visible, something that moved across the world's oceans in plain sight, carrying cargo, carrying passengers, proving that the atom could build instead of destroy. The NS Savannah was the flagship of that idea. She was not just an engineering project. She was a diplomatic statement with a propeller shaft. On paper, the math behind her was staggering. A conventional cargo ship burns through roughly 300,000 gallons of bunker fuel every single day at sea. That is a full Olympic swimming pool of the dirtiest, thickest petroleum on Earth, consumed in 24 hours just to keep the propeller turning. Over a single long voyage from New York to Yokohama, one ship swallows enough fuel to fill a small office building floor to ceiling. The Savannah needed none of it. Her reactor core held enough enriched uranium to run continuously for 3.5 years. No refueling stops, no fuel docks, no dependency on oil prices in any port city along the route, just sustained, controlled heat from a process happening at the atomic level, deep inside a shielded chamber below the waterline. Here's how the machine actually worked. Inside the reactor pressure vessel, uranium-full rods sat arranged in a precise geometric pattern. Neutrons fired between them in a controlled chain reaction. That reaction generated enormous heat, not through burning, not through any chemical process, but through the splitting of atoms at a scale that has no real equivalent in everyday life. That heat moved into pressurized water flowing through the primary cooling loop. This water was kept under roughly 2,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, so extreme that it could not boil even at temperatures exceeding 550 degrees Fahrenheit. It carried that thermal energy into a steam generator sitting adjacent to the reactor compartment. In the steam generator, a completely separate loop of water absorbed the heat and flashed instantly into high-pressure steam. That steam drove the turbines. The turbines drove the reduction gears. The reduction gears turned the propeller shaft. A ship displacing 22,000 tons moved through open ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest fuel source, producing zero exhaust from combustion. The propeller turned because of controlled atomic physics happening inside a compartment you could fit 2 family cars inside. The engineering was quiet, almost unnervingly quiet. No roaring diesel engines shaking the hull. No vibration from combustion cycles rattling the bulkheads. Crew members who served aboard the Savannah described an almost eerie stillness compared to every conventional freighter they had sailed before. The loudest thing in the engine room was the hum of the turbines and water moving through pipes. It worked exactly as designed, and that is precisely where the story breaks from every version most people expect. Here's the thing that completely dismantles the common sense narrative. The NS Savannah was not canceled because the reactor failed. It was not shut down because of a radiation leak, a pressure vessel rupture, or any catastrophic accident at sea. There was no emergency, no evacuation, no disaster. The technology performed without incident. What killed nuclear cargo shipping was not an engineering problem. It was the world the ship had to sail through the moment it left open ocean and tried to pull into a port. Every single port the Savannah attempted to enter required individual government-level negotiations before she was allowed to dock. Not Port Authority approval, not a harbor master signing a form. Actual diplomatic negotiations between the United States government and the government of the destination country conducted months in advance for every single port call. Japan took the better part of a year of talks before allowing the Savannah to dock in Yokohama. Even then, protesters lined the waterfront in large numbers. The memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was less than 20 years old. A nuclear vessel flying an American flag in a Japanese harbor was not a symbol of peaceful atoms to the people standing on that dock. No amount of engineering documentation changed that emotional reality. West Germany required a separate legal framework before she could offload cargo in Hamburg. Some ports refused entirely, regardless of what safety certifications or government assurances the Americans presented. The insurance situation was arguably worse. Commercial shipping insurance is built on historical actuarial data. Underwriters look at decades of loss records for a given vessel type and price their premiums accordingly. There was no historical data for a nuclear-powered cargo ship. Insurance companies had no model. What they did have was an instinct that potential liability from a reactor incident in a commercial port was so catastrophically large that standard marine insurance frameworks could not contain it. The premiums they quoted were so far outside normal commercial shipping rates that the economics of the Savannah collapsed before a single ton of profitable freight was ever moved. Then there was crew licensing. Every officer serving aboard a nuclear vessel required special federal certification that took months to obtain. The maritime labor pool that could legally operate the ship was tiny. Training pipelines to expand that pool did not exist at commercial scale. Every voyage required assembling a crew that no normal shipping company anywhere in the world was staffed to replicate. And underneath all of these obstacles sat one devastating economic reality that nobody in the Atoms for Peace program had fully accounted for. Bunker fuel was cheap, not slightly cheaper, extraordinarily cheap. In the 1960s, heavy fuel oil was priced at a level that made the entire operating cost advantage of nuclear propulsion essentially invisible on a commercial balance sheet. The financial pressure that would have forced the shipping industry to absorb the political and regulatory pain of going nuclear simply did not exist. A technology can be superior in every measurable engineering dimension and still lose decisively to an entrenched system if that system is cheap enough, familiar enough, and legally simple enough to operate. The Savannah carried that lesson across every ocean she sailed, and the industry watching her was not ready to hear it. Other countries tried anyway. West Germany launched the NS Otto Hahn in 1968, a nuclear-powered ore carrier built for commercial freight. It completed 126 voyages over 10 years. The reactor performed without incident. But the same port access problems, the same insurance complications, the same crew licensing burdens followed her into every harbor she entered. The economics never resolved. Japan launched the Mutsu in 1972 after years of political battles so fierce that the ship spent extended periods anchored offshore because no port community would allow her to dock. When a minor radiation issue was detected during early sea trials, the political fallout was severe enough that the vessel never recovered a path to commercial operation. She was eventually converted to a conventional research ship and the nuclear system removed entirely. 3 countries, 3 ships, decades of engineering investment, 0 commercial cargo operations that ever approached financial viability. By the time the oil shocks of the 1970s arrived, which by every rational economic calculation should have been the moment nuclear cargo shipping finally made undeniable sense, the window had already closed. The regulatory frameworks were not built. Port access agreements were not in place. The insurance industry had no viable product to offer, and public fear of nuclear technology, building steadily through the 60s, was sharpened into something far more powerful by 3 Mile Island in 1979 and Chernobyl in 1986. The political cost of pushing nuclear cargo shipping forward after Chernobyl was essentially immeasurable. No government in the democratic world was going to stand before voters and propose more nuclear vessels in civilian ports in the years following that disaster. The Savannah was decommissioned in 1972. She is still afloat today, tied to a pier in Baltimore, Maryland, designated as a National Historic Landmark. You can see the white hull from the highway if you know where to look, a working machine that never got to do the work it was built for. What is genuinely strange is that the technology never went away. Nuclear-powered vessels are operating right now, today, all over the world. Russia operates a fleet of nuclear icebreakers capable of holding Arctic shipping lanes open through ice conditions that would stop any conventional ship cold. They do exactly what the Savannah promised. They run for years without refueling. They work. The difference is geography and control. Icebreakers operate in remote Arctic waters where there are no civilian port communities lined up to protest a reactor pulling into harbor. The economic case is not debatable because no other technology can physically do the job, and the Russian government controls both the ships and every port they ever enter. Remove those 3 conditions and you are back to the Savannah problem. Same physics. Completely different outcome. Which leaves the question the Savannah story makes impossible to ignore. If nuclear propulsion works in the water and fails on the dock, what does that tell you about why the United States Navy has been running nuclear reactors on aircraft carriers and submarines for over 60 years without the civilian program ever finding its footing? Same reactor physics. Same enriched uranium fuel. Identical thermodynamic principles driving turbines connected to propeller shafts. One program became one of the most powerful naval forces in human history. The other ended with 3 ships and a landmark resting quietly in Baltimore. The gap between those 2 outcomes is one of the most revealing stories in the history of military versus civilian engineering. It reaches far beyond ships, and it changes how you think about every piece of advanced technology that shapes the world you live in today. That is exactly what comes next. If the hidden mechanics behind machines that changed history are what keep you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Subscribing means you will be here.